I'm Stas Margaronis with the American Journal of Transportation, and we're visiting today with Jennifer Carpenter, the head of the American Waterways Operators and the American Maritime Partnership. Good morning from California and good afternoon to you, Jennifer, in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much for being with us this day, very close to Christmas. We have a lot of things that we would like to talk to you about, and thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you, Stas, for the opportunity.
Okay. Jennifer, let's get started with the news this week. According to GCaptain this week, President-elect Trump is now indicating support for the Jones Act, but Project 2025, which he supports, called for the repeal of the Jones Act. And during his previous presidency, his administration supported waivers of the Jones Act. How confident should we be about the Jones Act?
I will say this, the Jones Act is foundational to the economic, the homeland, the national security of this country. So we need to never rest in educating policymakers, old or new, about its importance. I think that, if you were to sit down in a lab and try to concoct a piece of legislation that, sounded and looked and felt more America first than the Jones Act, I don't think you could do it. The Jones Act is really about securing America's maritime border and making sure that we as Americans are in control of our supply chain here at home, of our economic security, of those borders, through which foreign interests could enter not only our coastal ports, but the inland waterways, the bloodstream of the country. So I hope that the Trump administration is looking at the Jones Act and saying, yeah, this sounds a lot like the stuff that we campaigned on. It's a very common sense piece of legislation that has long enjoyed bipartisan, bicameral support. Some of our biggest supporters over the years have been Republicans over here on the right and Democrats over here on the left, who can agree at a time of not agreeing on much else that this law is good for the country. I hope that's how the new administration and the new Congress will also see it.
Very good. Thank you. Now, Jennifer, just so we can explain this to our audience who may or may not have our understanding of the Jones Act and the importance of the industry, how would life look like if we did not have the Jones Act in terms of our brown and blue water mariners and maritime operations? What would it look like? How would we be different?
Yeah, the word that I'm going to use, Stas, is borderless. I mean, just think about it for a minute. We would literally have no maritime border. It would be 100% porous. Think about, the fact that when you're flying between California and Washington, D.C., you are flying on a U.S. carrier. Those are American pilots. Those are American flight attendants. Imagine if you had to rely for your flight on the possibility, the likelihood that a foreign carrier, a foreign company considered it in their interest, more important than something else they might do to provide that service for you. That is where we would be from a maritime perspective without the Jones Act. We would literally be dependent on foreign ship owners who could be controlled by foreign governments to enable us to move the harvest from the Midwest down to the Gulf Coast, to move energy supplies between regions of our country, to supply our fellow Americans in Puerto Rico, in Hawaii, in Alaska. That's a scary place to be. We've said things like this for a long time within the domestic maritime industry, and I think sometimes it sounded a little academic to people. And the pandemic was a huge wake-up call, I think, for a lot of us. Oh, empty shelves, not being able to get what we need when we need it. Yeah, that's a thing that can really happen. And we would be utterly exposed to that possibility if we did not have the Jones Act and did not have this critical infrastructure in American hands.
And during the pandemic, as you just referenced, we had uninterrupted services while our international ports had difficulty sometimes getting product in and out of our ports. In terms of the Jones Act, we were very well served, weren't we?
That is 100% true, Stas. And in addition to the reliability of service, domestic carriers keeping cargo moving continually between U.S. ports, we also saw very important stability in rates. If you remember back, to that dark time, we saw in the international shipping industry tremendous fluctuation in rates, just skyrocketing. We didn't have that in the domestic trade. It was very steady. So, coming back to the election, I know there's lots of, after action analysis going on. What were the voters saying? What were they asking for? I don't think anybody is disagreeing that voters were asking for border security. Voters were asking for attention on inflation, reduced prices. Hello. I mean, that's what the Jones Act gives us: price stability, American control of our supply chain, maritime border security.
So, Jennifer, one of the issues that we had during the previous Trump presidency is we had a number of waivers of the Jones Act. Now, you and I talked about that subsequently, and you explained that the waiver language is much tougher now than it was then. How possible is it that we could see some more waivers start to show up because of the concern about government regulation and this somehow spilling over into the Jones Act?
Yeah, I think Congress has been very clear on a bipartisan basis in two successive National Defense Authorization Acts in 2020 and 2022. We do not want to see spurious, unnecessary Jones Act waivers. There is a provision in law allowing for a Jones Act waiver when necessary in the interest of the national defense, meaning to meet an immediate need with respect to military operations. Congress clarified that. They tightened that up. They said, oh no, don't try to say everything falls under the rubric of national defense. What we mean is military operations. They said no more blanket waivers. If someone wants a Jones Act waiver, they need to come forward. They need to make the case that there is a national defense need for a vessel to move this cargo at this time. And they need to do that publicly. This needs to not be some dark of night. Who's really asking for this? What shadowy hand is the puppet master here? They need to come forward. They need to put their name on a website, and they need to let a little sunshine in. That is hugely gratifying. So I think all of that action by Congress is going to be really helpful in, discouraging waivers that were always kind of opportunistic. Hey, maybe we got a chance to make a few additional bucks by using a cheap foreign flag vessel, not because it's necessary, but like, hey, why not? Well, here's why not: because it's illegal, and you're going to have to stand up and be counted, and just kind of let that sit for a while. So really, really good to see that action on the part of Congress.
Thank you. Now, Jennifer, again, for people that do not know, could you give us just an overview of the economic impact of the Jones Act and how many jobs are impacted and where they are?
Yeah, so 650,000 American jobs are supported by the Jones Act. And those jobs, Stas, go from coast to coast throughout the heartland. These are jobs where, a high school student, a person separating from the military, a hardworking, drug-free individual can come into the industry green, without experience, without having gone to a maritime academy or college or, tons of debt or anything like that. Come in, I want to work hard. They can get trained on the job, and within 5, 7 years, they're making a 6-figure income. They've got great benefits. They're supporting their family. Their kids can choose whether to go to college or whether to work on a boat or whether to do whatever they want to. You can live where you want. You get on a boat, you're on the boat for a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time. If you want to live in the mountains of Colorado, if you want to live in the desert of Arizona, go for it. You can do that. So these are jobs that are not only economically compensatory, but they're also jobs that offer a lot of opportunity for work-life balance, which I think is something that is really important just to, today's workers. People are saying life is too short, to give it all to the office, at the expense of my family, my soul, my whatever. And, maritime, yes, there is dedication. You are on that boat. You are in that shipyard. You are working hard while you are there. This is not easy work. This is rewarding work. But this is tough work. And then you've got sustained time off when you can go do what you want. So I think we've got a real opportunity. I think we try hard and we do a decent job of telling the story of, the ladders of economic opportunity that are provided in this industry. I'm not sure we do a good enough job of pitching the work-life balance benefits that are, to me, a really important part of, the maritime industry value proposition to employees of today.
Okay. Now, Jennifer, this kind of dovetails into a question that I was going to ask you a little bit later, but comes into it. We're having a shortfall of mariners in the United States. You and I have discussed this in the past, and we have the same problem in the tug and barge industry as we have in the ocean industry. What is it that we can do to get more young people interested in an industry which, as you just explained, may pay pretty well, but it's tough work and it's not for the faint-hearted?
I think it starts with making sure that they know it's there and not assuming that they do. And I think sometimes, we fall into that trap as an industry of not casting our net wide enough. This is an all hands. This needs to be public, private sector, the U.S. government, the military has a strong stake in making sure that there are people who want to go into the maritime industry, whether they're building submarines for the Navy, whether they are working on, domestic or, on commercial or military ships in a shipyard, whatever kind of vessels they're sailing on. So, I worry less. Sometimes people say, oh, we're trying to recruit people to build submarines and those ads are really cool. Are we potentially, cannibalizing, poaching the same pool of people we want to work in our industry? I'm not super worried about that. Let's cast the net wide to people who want to have a meaningful career that contributes to the security of the United States and make sure they know what the options are. I think there's a lot that we can do that we haven't fully tapped into. And then I just want to add, because I think it's so important, and sometimes, Stas, it can feel a little bit like solving world hunger to say, how are we going to go secure the pipeline, the next generation of mariners? That feels like a really big task that is kind of, more than any one entity can solve. A very finite, simple, limited thing that we can do, which will show respect, which will support, which will enable mariners to move, up their career path and stay in the industry better, is to overhaul the Coast Guard's really antiquated mariner credentialing system. Again, the antiquated credentialing system is not the reason young people don't know about our industry, but sometimes it is a reason, that a person on their 5th issue says, forget about it. This is crazy. I cannot be, waiting forever to find out whether my, medical waiver got looked at. We can do so much better by mariners. And I think we are increasingly seeing a recognition that we need to. So, in the scheme of government problems to solve, like this one is not that hard. We need to allocate a small amount of money. We need a focused Coast Guard led effort to do that, industry input, and we can make a big positive difference. That would be a great thing to see as a goal that could be accomplished in the next 4 years.
Very good. This week, Jennifer, a bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at strengthening the American shipbuilding and commercial maritime industries following what they characterized as decades of neglect. And the bill in question is called the Shipbuilding and Harbor Infrastructure for Prosperity and Security for America Act, and it's supported by Senators Mark Kelly of Arizona, Todd Young of Indiana, as well as John Garamendi from California and Trent Kelly of Mississippi. Representative Mike Walsh, who's been tapped by the Trump administration to be national security advisor, has also expressed support for the bill. What impact will the bill have if it passes in terms of helping us to rebuild the American maritime industry?
Yeah, I think I just cannot give enough credit to this bipartisan, bicameral group of lawmakers from literally throughout the country. I mean, just think of that: Arizona, Mississippi, California, Indiana. That just goes to show, where this industry touches, for their leadership in introducing the SHIPS Act. This is huge. It really builds on the foundation of the Jones Act. The Jones Act deals with the domestic maritime industry, as we know. And, I think the Jones Act fleet is going strong. We need to continue to renew the fleet. We need to continue to attract mariners. We need to avoid spurious waivers. We need to keep on keeping on. When we come to the international fleet, that's where we've had U.S. vessels at a unmanageable competitive disadvantage to Chinese subsidized ships, other foreign actors who massively subsidize their maritime industries. And it is not good for U.S. national security, homeland security, to have such a relatively small U.S. flag presence in the international maritime industry. And so I think what these lawmakers have done is long overdue. They've said, we've got to make investments. We've got to take a comprehensive approach. It's going to take time. It's going to have to be gradual. But the path that we are on, is not sustainable when it comes to the international fleet. And we as a nation need to do something about it. That is huge. And I think that, introducing this very comprehensive bill is really smart, because it just shows, there is a coherent vision. They're thinking about everything. And then as we move into a new Congress, I think it's going to be really important to be creative and look for opportunities. Here's a tax bill moving. There are tax provisions of that legislation. Is there an opportunity for some of these things to get done there? There's a Maritime Administration authorization bill. There's a Coast Guard authorization bill. That could be a vehicle for some of these provisions. So I think that comprehensive vision, which is so really positive, and then being legislatively nimble and seizing opportunities to get pieces of this done, with the idea that, we get a couple of years down the road and, it may have taken place in a series of legislative steps, but then we'll be able to look back and say, wow, we got a lot of this done, and, we're on our way to getting some much needed things done for American security.
Jennifer, this is going to require government spending to invest in shipyards and shipbuilding. Based on the resistance that we have seen this week to government spending, do you think that the consensus is there to seriously invest in shipbuilding and the maritime industry?
I think we have to make a strong, impassioned case that American security is worth investing in. We've got to support our national defense, and maritime is a critical support for our national defense. We need to do that in a smart way, 100%. But we need to make investments. And just like in a business, you don't just say, I'm going to cut costs, but I'm not going to make any investments, so that you're not going to sell your product or service. You're not going to be anywhere. The same is true for government. We absolutely need to minimize wasteful spending, unnecessary spending. things that the private sector could do better. But U.S. national security is something that absolutely needs investment. And I will add, that the maritime industry is very much a force multiplier. So we're not saying we need a 2,000 ship navy or something like that, which would cost a gajillion dollars. We're saying we need a sufficiently sized domestic and international U.S. flag industry that is a force multiplier that our military can rely on. So it's really, I think, a very cost-effective approach to enhancing American security. And I think that piece sometimes gets lost. It's like, what would happen if we didn't have any U.S. flag commercial vessels? Well, geez, I see two options and I don't like either of them. Either we'd have to build all government vessels to do that. Now you're spending money. Or we'd have to rely on foreign powers to come to our rescue. I don't like that anymore. I don't like that any better. And I don't think most lawmakers do either.
Jennifer, Secretary of the Navy Carlos del Toro worked very hard to develop alliances with some of our allies, South Korea and Japan particularly, to create partnerships in U.S. shipbuilding so that we could incorporate best global practices from both of those countries. Taiwan also has a modest but significant shipbuilding industry. As you know, Hanwha acquired the Philly shipyard this year. Do you see, and another issue which is kind of on the radar screen is Nippon Steel was attempting to acquire U.S. Steel, which could have upgraded steel manufacturing in the U.S., particularly steel plate, which we are going to need for shipbuilding. And my question to you is, should we be encouraging collaborations with our allies who have shipbuilding capabilities to bring that source of quality and investment into the shipbuilding industry in the United States?
Yes, I think there is a lot of opportunity there. And, I give Secretary Del Toro a lot of credit for, really focusing attention on the importance of shipbuilding and maritime. Now, I think I want to be clear, we need to build those ships here. Right? I mean, let's think about what's happened in South Korea over the last 2 weeks. They are a great U.S. ally. We have seen some, political uncertainty here. That's just a small reminder. Taiwan is right next door, to the Chinese mainland. So absolutely, we need closer collaboration with our allies. We need to learn. We need to apply best practices where there are barriers, to sharing information, technology, ways that can enable us to strengthen the American shipbuilding industry, the American maritime industry. We should look to break down those barriers. But we want to be building vessels here in the United States with American workers, drawing on, global best practices.
Very good. Thank you. Let's switch gears here. Can you discuss how the new WRDA bill will impact waterways operators?
Yes. And this is a good news story. It's nice to be able to end the 118th Congress saying, here's something that got done that was really positive. And I want to give our partners at Waterways Council, Inc. a ton of credit for this. One of the really important changes that is incorporated in that legislation would change the cost share for construction and major rehabilitation projects for inland waterways, locks and dams, to 75% general treasury, 25% from the Inland Waterways Trust Fund. And what this will do is this will unlock an additional $1.4 billion over the next 10 years for badly needed inland waterways infrastructure upgrades. That is so important to, just keeping our marine highways operational, to keeping American exporters, farmers competitive against foreign producers. So really, really positive. There are some other positive changes in there, which aim to make sure that the Corps of Engineers can nimbly move equipment around to proactively dredge as we face low water situations on the river. So some really good stuff in there. And I want to really commend the bipartisan work of Congress to get that done.
Jennifer, what was the previous cost share ratio?
65-35. And just a few years ago, it was actually 50-50. So, Stas, it's a little bit like Jones Act waivers, where Congress is like, wait a minute, we think we see an opportunity for an improvement. We're gonna continue to work on this in a kind of iterative way till we think we've got it where we want it. So very, very positive to see that change from 50-50 to 65-35 and now to 75-25 federal/trust fund. It's a real public-private partnership that works.
Now, as I recall, the shortfall a couple of years ago was there was about $2 billion worth of projects that still needed to be modernized. You referenced a figure there of 1.4, I believe. So are we getting close to getting complete on getting us back to where we should have been several years ago in terms of upgrading these locks and dams?
Well, it's going to help a lot because unfortunately, one of the things we've seen with inland waterways projects is the same thing we've seen elsewhere in the economy. That's inflation. We also have a government funding model where it can be difficult to construct projects in the most efficient way possible because money is being doled out in bits and pieces over a period of time. So we need more than we thought we did a few years ago because inflation has made the total higher. But it's really positive to see a strong bipartisan commitment to making those investments. I'm coming back to that word investment because that's really what this spending is.
Okay. Jennifer, could you talk about the low water issues that we had, especially on the upper Mississippi this year?
Yeah. So I will start with something positive, which is this. We have come a long way as an industry, the Corps of Engineers, the U.S. Coast Guard, in our communication over the last 3 years. So even as we have dealt with some pretty significant low water challenges in 2022, in 2023, in 2024, we have gotten better and better at how we communicate and how we work together to keep the waterways open for business. That has been really positive. Vessel operators are being smart about, hey, when do I need to reduce my draft because river conditions require it? Where do I have some running room, some good water, and I can move more product? The Coast Guard is working to make sure that they're setting buoys. The Corps is doing more proactive dredging. So conditions have been challenging, but the disruption has been not as bad this year nor last year as it was back in 2022 because we're getting better at working together. And what I like about that is, we're focusing on what we can control. We can't control the weather, but we can control how we plan for it and what we do about it. So really appreciate the good cooperation from the Coast Guard and the Corps there.
Very good. And segueing into the issue of the weather, the Propeller Club of Northern California held a sea level defense conference in November, and several California ports were participating. And we heard from NOAA about concerns that they have in the aftermath of the hurricanes that occurred towards the end of the year, that they are being attacked for providing weather information. And those attacks have focused on whether the data has been manipulated and the fact that maybe NOAA needs to be cut back or maybe even eliminated. And this is occurring as we're starting to see some dramatic increases in sea level rises along our coast, especially our southern coast. My question to you is NOAA important to ensure competent and up-to-date weather and navigational data for American mariners?
In a word, yes. Yes, it is. And, coming back to our previous conversation about smart government spending, absolutely. Nobody wants to see, waste, fraud, and abuse. Let's definitely look at how we're doing things. And, frankly, sometimes government lags the private sector. We know that in operating efficiently. I mentioned the Coast Guard's antiquated credentialing system. That's, exhibit A. Okay, this could be way better. This needs to be way better. This is not cutting edge technology. This is like, let's get ourselves into 2025 and not 1997. And so by all means, let's look for opportunities to do things smarter. But agencies like NOAA, like the Coast Guard, like the Corps of Engineers, these are all part of the resources that enable us to keep commerce moving in the United States. There's a reason NOAA exists in the Department of Commerce, because this is not like nice to have. This is fuzzy climate, whatever. It's like this is a foundational a precondition for safe and efficient maritime commerce.
And we heard from one of our weather forecasting partners at the Propeller Club that they find that developing routes for ships is getting more challenging with the weather, and that they need as much data as possible. And NOAA is where we get our data information, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And then you've got private sector providers who are coming up with electronic chart interfaces and things like that, which can enable mariners to utilize that information that much more efficiently. But absolutely, this is a valuable service that is provided that will continue to be valuable and needed.
Thank you. Jennifer, I want to switch over to the issue of offshore wind, which you have discussed as a job and economic generator for the American Waterways operators. And it is a target for cutbacks and elimination, according to statements made by people who are part of the incoming administration. My question to you is, should the maritime industry urge more support in Congress and with Republicans for offshore wind, as you yourself have emphasized that namely offshore wind has the potential to create new U.S. maritime jobs and Jones Act jobs?
It absolutely does. And I think it's important to sort of back up and say what we have seen is a massive increase in the need for energy in this country, right? We're producing more energy than we ever have before, but we need more. When you look at the energy generation needs from AI, from data centers, I mean, it's just massive. So we need all of the above. And we've got a huge opportunity to supplement existing energy sources with new energy sources, offshore wind being one of them, and to do that in a way that is really good for the American worker, that is good for the American manufacturing base. I recently co-authored a piece with Ann Reynolds of American Clean Power. And one of the things we pointed out was the distribution of investment in the jobs to produce vessels for this new offshore wind market throughout the United States. Sometimes people hear offshore wind and they think, New England or mid-Atlantic, or I think there's going to be something in the Gulf of Maine, or they're going to get to that in California. But, where are those vessels being built? Well, they're being built in Louisiana. They're being built in Mississippi. They're being built in Pennsylvania. They're being built in Wisconsin. Where's that steel coming from? It's coming from West Virginia. Where are these workers? Man, they're throughout the United States. So there is just a lot of opportunity here. So I would just hate to see us kind of get into sort of a binary, do we need Do we need, petroleum? Do we need offshore wind? Do we need solar? Do we need small scale nuclear? Yes, we do, and let's generate all of that safely in the most environmentally responsible way possible. And let's make sure those are American jobs.
Just as a reference point, I spoke to the Port of Long Beach a couple of months ago, and they are looking at building an offshore wind port at the Port of Long Beach. And creating an offshore wind port, I've got to imagine, just as on the East Coast, is going to create a lot of mariner jobs, right?
Lots of opportunity there. Lots of opportunity there. I will say one thing we do need to be very attentive to as we, just do more in the oceans, whether that's launching rockets or building offshore wind farms. We do need to keep our brains on maritime safety. And that, I think, makes it just really important that the Coast Guard be very proactive in interfacing not only with the private sector, but with other federal agencies, Bureau of Offshore Energy Management, states, to make sure that, we can all peacefully coexist. We've got navigation safety fairways. We've got wind farms in places where it's safe to have wind farms. We're doing this in an orderly way. And I think that's an area where we have seen some progress, over the last few years. It's just recognizing we don't want to get behind that ball. We need to be in front of it, and not, setting ourselves up for failure. We need to be setting ourselves up for success.
Well, just as to complement what you said, the projection on the West Coast for California is that they will need 12 new ocean-going tugboats to pull floating offshore wind turbines into place. And I can't imagine how many offshore supply vessels they're going to need to do maintenance and repair. I mean, this could be thousands of jobs, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the domestic maritime industry, we are in the business of, solving transportation and logistics challenges for our customers, whether sort of no matter what the trade, no matter what the cargo. So really encourage, wind developers to see our industry as a partner and a resource in, building out and helping to take advantage of the opportunities here.
Great. Now, you referenced the Coast Guard, and I am referencing a Marine Link interview that you did earlier this year, and I am quoting you here. There is a need on the regulatory side for some clarification on a couple of issues, including engine room crewing on ATBs with automated systems. This is an issue that Congress thought it addressed in the last Coast Guard authorization bill, the last National Defense Authorization Act. Unfortunately, the Coast Guard hasn't implemented it yet. It shouldn't come to this, but Congress may need to tell them again, we told you to do this. Please, this time, get it done. How is the Coast Guard doing in that regard?
We still need legislation. As you may or may not have heard, the Coast Guard authorization bill did not make it onto the defense authorization bill. So we're not going to have a Coast Guard authorization bill this Congress. Congress is going to have to pick that back up after the first of the year and get the process moving again. And we are very hopeful that this is a piece of unfinished business that will be addressed there, because the crux of the issue is vessel owners are making investments in advanced engine room technology, which allows for engine rooms that are not continuously crewed, that are monitored, taking advantage of the safety and efficiency benefits provided by this advanced technology. Congress included a provision in the 2022 Coast Guard Authorization Act to be explicit on how crewing levels could be adjusted when these automated systems are installed. And the Coast Guard essentially came back and said, this isn't worded right. We can't do this. And so Congress was working right down till the 11th hour when the NDAA train left the station to see if they could address that in the Coast Guard authorization bill. Coast Guard bill didn't move. So this is a piece of unfinished business. We will be pressing very hard to get that done in the next Congress. Articulated tug barge units have an extremely good safety record over a period of decades. And, this is a real opportunity to do something that I think, we have heard the incoming administration talk about, which is let's reduce unnecessary regulatory burdens that get in the way of progress and efficiency. Hello, Doge. This is one of those. Let's get out of our own way and make sure that vessel owners who have made these significant investments in advanced technology can realize the full benefits of those systems. We're not talking about replacing people. There is a lot of role for people and a lot of need for people, but we can do things more efficiently. And, we'd like to see the Coast Guard recognize that, as they did a few years ago. And we'd like to see legislation to just make this explicit in the next Coast Guard off bill.
Jennifer, is there an institutional reluctance within the Coast Guard to move on this?
Stas, I'm a little confused on this issue. The Coast Guard was for it before they were against it, quite candidly. A few years back, the Coast Guard went to the National Towing Safety Advisory Committee and gave them a task to say, help us figure out, what the conditions are under which engine room crewing could be adjusted based on the utilization of advanced systems. And TSAC worked on that. And we had Coast Guard admirals at headquarters saying, yes, this is great. We want to do it. And then there were a few lawyers who kind of threw a flag on the play and said, wait, we can't do that. We need some statutory change to enable us to do that. So we dutifully went to Congress and got legislation passed. And they said, oops, not that rock. We can't do it. It's been frustrating. We would like to, work hard with the Coast Guard and with Congress to get this problem solved next year. This is not a, safety versus efficiency trade-off. This is a both and it really needs to get done.
Very good. Now, you have been very, very clear about your concerns about sexual harassment and sexual assault. And the issue of sexual assault and harassment response is really important, you said, for both mariner safety and mariner mental health and well-being. We've got a continuing need to make sure that our members have the resources they need to build and maintain the kind of workplace cultures that are needed in this industry. We also need to make sure that the Coast Guard is clearly and practically implementing the Safer Seas Act that was enacted at the end of the last Congress. There are several areas with respect to surveillance cameras for larger offshore vessels and master key control systems where existing guidance is not clear at best and is problematic at worst. There is a need for some clarity here. What needs to happen to get this problem solved?
Yeah, well, let me start by just reiterating the foundational importance of culture, culture change, of really thoroughgoing work by companies to instill cultures of respect and safety and inclusiveness for all mariners, no matter their gender, no matter their race, no matter their religion, no matter what. We want to attract, retain the best people to work in this industry. We tout ourselves as having great work-life balance opportunities. It's just foundational. You need to be able to go on a boat and feel like you're going to be safe and respected. And I know that AWO members and companies throughout the industry are working really hard on that. So I want to emphasize that's like a thing you can never stop doing. You can never be done. And if you were somehow perfect at it today, you'd have to, keep working to get better tomorrow, because anything involving people, it's just dynamic. So I want to emphasize that. With regard to the Coast Guard policies, we have seen some improvement and some clarification on a couple of those policies that you mentioned. And I want to thank the Coast Guard for that. On video surveillance, they have clarified that with respect to record retention, you don't need to maintain, terabytes of data where, there's an empty hallway with no one in it and no one saying anything, but you are storing this for years and years. What is the point of that? You need to store, data that could be used in the event of an incident to figure out what went on. So it took a little doing, but the Coast Guard has clarified that. Similarly, on master key control, there were a lot of questions. What if I don't have, a sort of keyed lock system on my small boat the way you do in, say, a hotel, and, the housekeeper has a master key that they scan and come. We don't have something like that. So are you saying I need to put one in? No, the Coast Guard has said that's not what we're saying. We're saying if you have a key system and somebody has a master key that can get into any room, you need to have a way to log who has that. So if we ever need to go back and say what happened here, it is clear. So there have been some policy clarifications which are helpful. I will say, in the spirit of continuous improvement, that I think there is a lot of opportunity to get better at this. The Safer Seas Act was passed 2 years ago, and we haven't seen a proposed rule on this. If there had been an effort to start a rulemaking process, which has all kinds of opportunities for stakeholder participation, I think we would not only be further down the road to clear, implementable guidance and standards, but we would have avoided some of the fits and starts. It wouldn't have been like the Coast Guard takes a stab at policy without industry input, and then industry comes back and says, you forgot this, because they would have got the feedback on the front end. So I want to give credit where credit is due, but I also want to sort of challenge a continued effort to engage stakeholders earlier in the process and make sure that the rulemaking process works efficiently.
And do we expect to see a rule anytime soon?
We expect to see a rule, but we don't expect to see it anytime soon, I think, is the just straightforward, no nonsense answer to your question. We haven't seen a proposed rule yet, so it's going to be a while before we see a rule, which means for better or for worse, we're going to be operating off of policy guidance.
And Jennifer, the Coast Guard is having its own internal problems about sexual harassment too, and I'm referencing the foul anchor report that seems to not have been clearly understood or at least clearly implemented.
Yes, and I think Congress is looking into that, very, very hard. And I will just say that, I think the couple points here, preventing and responding effectively to sexual assault, sexual harassment, it's a shared challenge, right? Nobody's immune from that. Everybody, the maritime industry needs to be focused on making sure its house is squeaky clean there, and the Coast Guard does too. And I think, part of the intersection between that issue, the Coast Guard's dealing with its own internal issues, and implementation of the Safer Seas Act as it applies to the maritime industry is, I would hope that Congress would be sort of judicious in terms of what they are asking the Coast Guard to do. So the Coast Guard has a lot of work to do on itself, and I think they would acknowledge that. And they have, a pretty significant list of things that they need to do with respect to video surveillance and master key control and safety management system provisions and responding to sexual assault and sexual harassment reporting. There are some areas where the Safer Seas Act could be tightened up so that we're not asking the Coast Guard to do as many things, but we're giving them the opportunity to do what they do well. For example, there is a sort of hanging chad of a term, harassment, in the Safer Seas Act, referring to harassment other than sexual assault and sexual harassment. And there is no specificity around sort of how this gets reported to the Coast Guard. Only that harassment in violation of company policy or law needs to get reported. From industry's perspective, this significantly adds to the Coast Guard's workload without giving them any new tools to deal with, and really is unnecessary and unhelpful in light of the existing EEOC enforced regime that is already there. Companies have policies and procedures. They are overseen by the EEOC. Inserting a requirement to report to the Coast Guard really does not add a lot from a mariner protection benefit. It increases the Coast Guard's workload, and not to get too wonky, could actually complicate timely company response to an incident while they're waiting to see what the Coast Guard is going to do. So that is another issue that we hope that Congress will, just take a close look at with an eye toward fine-tuning the very well-intentioned and important legislation that is the Safer Seas Act.
Very good. Jennifer, the last question relates to the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. And I have you quoted as saying EPA is due to finalize its regulations implementing that statute later this year, which is 2024, setting standards for ballast water and other vessel discharge. The Coast Guard will then need to pick up the baton and produce its regulations implementing the EPA standards. Where are we on that?
So EPA did its work. They published their rule. From AWO's perspective, they did a very good job. They grappled with industry comments. They implemented the law. And now the ball is in the Coast Guard's court. So we would very much hope, and now, by the way, all of this is happening several years later than Congress said that it should under the Vessel Incidental Discharge Act. So we need to keep moving forward here. And we're going to be pushing hard as the new administration takes office to keep this progress moving. This rule that EPA has produced is absolutely something that should stay. It was put in place by, it was required by Congress as an effort to come up with a practical, effective alternative to the previously existing patchwork of state-by-state requirements, which was good for nobody, not good for the industry, not good for the environment. So this is a government efficiency approach that is also environmentally protective. Win-win. Thank you, EPA. Now it is time for the Coast Guard to publish its regulations saying how do vessel owners meet these standards that EPA has established. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there for the Coast Guard to apply its expertise, with respect to vessel operations, expertise that, I think EPA would freely admit that that's not really their lane. And so we see some opportunities for the Coast Guard to make efficiency improvements to the current system as they implement those standards. And we're excited about that. And so we hope that as the new administration comes in, there's a tendency as new administrations come in to kind of cast a little bit of a jaundiced eye on what their predecessor did. This is a rulemaking with a lot of history. It's been worked on by a Republican administration. It was carried forward under a Democratic administration. Now we're back to a Republican administration. This is just good. It needs to keep moving forward. And we're hopeful that that'll happen expeditiously.
Jennifer, as always, it is an education and an experience to be with you and to hear what progress you've clearly been making at AWO and also with AMP now. And I want to thank you very much for your time. Wish you and your family and your organization the best for the holiday and hopefully a successful 2025. Thank you very much for being with us, and we wish you the best for the new year.
Stas, thank you very much, and right back at you. Happy holidays. All the best for the new year. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.